Hello again, students. Here is your flipped grammar lesson for Storytown Lesson 19 Grammar. Our subject is simple present tense. For this video, you will need your Whisk worksheet, a pen or a pencil, and optionally a highlighter. On your Whisk worksheet, under Unit of Study, please write simple present tense. Then in the W section, write where and when you watched this video. Remember that in the S section, you will be writing a 5-sentence summary of what you are about to learn. Our theme this week is mimetic and novelty architecture. So let's get started while looking at some pictures of these strange designs for buildings. First, let's take a quick review of verbs. This is all information that we have learned in previous weeks. So if some of it looks unfamiliar to you, you should go back and re-watch some of the previous lessons we have done so far this year. Verbs tell the action or condition of the subject of the sentence. That means every sentence has to have a verb in it in order to be a complete sentence. Verbs can be action verbs or linking verbs, which connect the subject to a describing word in the predicate. And verbs can be the main verb of a sentence, or they can be helping verbs, which come in front of a main verb in order to tell us more about the verb's tense. Speaking of tenses, we are going to be focusing on the simple present tense this week. You probably have heard of the present, past, and future tenses of verbs in the past because you've studied this several times throughout your schooling so far. Right now, we're only focusing on the simple present tense. Later on, we'll get into present perfect and present progressive and other kinds of present tenses. Simple present tense shows an action that is happening now or shows an action that happens over and over. Let's look at some examples so that you know what kinds of verbs act in the present tense when they are used in sentences. If I want to talk about the subject of my sentence in a way that shows that the action or condition is happening now or is happening over and over again, I need to be able to form the present tense of the verb. If the subject is singular, you want to match your present tense verb with your subject. This is called subject-verb agreement, and we will study this a little bit more later on in the video. If you have the singular subject, follow the add s spelling rule for the verb when there's a singular subject. So you might remember learning about this where you add just the s to a regular verb, you add es if it ends with s, x, ch, sh, etc., and drop the y and add ies when you have a consonant followed by y. Let's look at the examples on this page. This is a picture of a temple that you can actually see in Thailand if you ever go there as a tourist. My sentences are, the dragon wraps around the building. It certainly catches your attention. In the first sentence, wraps is the verb, and because dragon is a singular subject, I add an s to the verb in order to make it agree. In the second sentence, catches is the verb, and it is the singular subject. Because the word catch ends with ch, I add an es in order to make the verb match the singular subject. But what if the subject is plural? Well, for plural subjects, you use a verb with no s added. I know this seems a little bit backwards because we're used to using plural with s, but for verbs you do the opposite of what you would do for a noun. So let's look at these examples of the verbs that match or agree with plural subjects. Its claws grip the sides of the temple. People take lots of pictures. In the first sentence, you notice that the verb grip has no s at the end, even though the subject, claws, is plural, and that's because not adding the s makes the verb agree with the plural subject. The same thing is going on in the second sentence. Take is the verb in the sentence. It doesn't have an S at the end because the subject it agrees with, people, is plural. Now, of course, where would we be without our tricky verbs? Here are some of the verbs that are irregular when they are in the present tense. Remember the forms of be, am, is, are, was, and were? Well, the first three out of that list are in the present tense, am, is, and are. Next, the forms of have are irregular when they're in the present tense. The forms of have are have, has, and had. The present tense ones are have and has. Let's practice using some irregular present tense verbs in a sentence. Which form of to be would fit in the sentence on this slide? The church blank upside down. I hope you put the word is in the sentence. The church is upside down would be a sentence in the simple present tense. How about this sentence? What form of to have fits? This sculpture blank an intriguing design. I hope you put the word has in this sentence because this sculpture has an intriguing design is in the simple present tense. In a previous part of this video, I mentioned subject-verb agreement, and we're going to take a closer look at that now. What we mean by subject-verb agreement is that a verb must agree with its subject in number and in person, which means that if you have a plural subject, you have to have the verb that agrees with a plural subject. If you have a singular subject, you have to have a verb that agrees with a singular subject. If you have the subject of the sentence as you always use a plural verb when the subject is you. Let's take a look at some examples while we practice putting in verbs that agree with the subject of the sentence. Here are two sentences about this unusual house that a family built in China. In both sentences, I would like for you to find a form of to love which would fit in the sentence. The first sentence has a plural subject, the people who live here, blank, music. And the second sentence has a singular subject, someone really, blank, the violin and piano. In the first sentence, the plural subject people agrees with the plural version of the verb love. In the second sentence, the singular subject someone agrees with the singular version of the verb loves. Again, I know it's a little bit funny to think that using the S at the end would agree with the singular subject, but that's what we're talking about when we refer to subject-verb agreement. Another subject we need to cover this week are some of the easily confused verbs. These verbs are in the simple present tense, but people often make mistakes when they use them in sentences. The first two are lie and lay. Look at the chart to see the difference between the two of them. Lie means to rest or recline, whereas lay means to put or place something. The next two are sit and set. Sit means to be seated or perch, and set is when you put something down. The next are rise and raise. Rise means to get up, and raise means to move to a higher place or to grow. And finally, we have bring and take. Bring is when you transport something from a farther place to a nearer place. And take is the opposite, where you transport something from a nearer place to a farther place. We are going to look at the last two examples of novelty architecture while we practice differentiating between these easily confused verbs. Take a look at this huge pair of cowboy boots. These boots are actually a bathroom. Can you see the door near the heel? You can find this bathroom near a park in Seattle. Which verb fits in these sentences? Look back at your chart if needed. The giant lies or lays his boots next to the children's park. He sets or sits them in an obvious place. In the first sentence, lays is the correct present tense of the verb because it means to put or place. The giant is putting or placing his boots. In the second sentence, sets is the correct form of the simple present tense verb because set means to put something down. Next, take a look at this parking garage, which is actually attached to the Kansas City Public Library. I think you can probably figure out why they chose this design for their parking garage. Which form of the present tense verb fits? Bring or take your books back to the library. Set or sit down and enjoy a classic novel. In the first sentence, take would fit because you are transporting something from a nearer place, such as your home, and taking it to a farther place, which is the library. And in the second sentence, sit is the correct present tense verb because you are talking about being seated. That concludes our lesson on simple present tenses for this week. So if you need to, please go back and watch any part of this video again if you don't understand something. Then in the S section, write a 5-sentence summary of what you learned from the video. When you're done with that, in the Q section, write a question that you might have about something you did not understand in the video. If you don't have any questions at all, please create a test question for your classmates. Make sure your assignment is completed on time and turned in by the due date. We will see you next week.